Welcome to On the Entrepreneur's Journey podcast. I'm Peter Santry, a former Wall Street exec turned leadership coach. And on this show, we talk with seasoned entrepreneurs and executives about building strong, scalable, and enduring companies. Today's guest is Mark Curtis, the co-founder and now chairman of Splash Car Washes, a brand known for delivering high-end hand washes, detailing, and oil changes at scale. Mark started Splash in 1981 and has been on a decades-long journey of growth and trial and error. He bootstrapped his business through the early years, navigated tough people challenges in a labor-intensive business, and eventually set his sights on consolidating a fragmented industry. So if you're serious about scaling a service business, attracting and retaining frontline workforce, or preparing a company for investment and eventual exit, this conversation is filled with actionable takeaways. So welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you, Peter. Good to be here.
Good. Well, let's dive in, and that's probably where we start this story. I really love your entrepreneurial heritage, and I'd love it if you start with that story, and then how maybe you got into and transitioned from, I guess, your first job in, I think it was business banking, to buying Greenwich Car Wash in 1981.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I got out of school, went into a training program at a regional bank out here in Connecticut, and went through the program and got promoted. Ultimately found myself as a commercial lending officer on the Greenwich platform of Union Trust. And if I didn't have an entrepreneurial spirit before, I certainly gained one by lending money to these small companies that were doing business with the bank. And I just fell in love with the idea of being in business for myself. So every Sunday I would get the New York Times, and back in the day they had classified ads for businesses for sale every Sunday. And I'd pour through the ads every week and imagine myself in this business or that business. And finally I came across one that had a Greenwich phone number. And, being a Greenwich native and resident and working in town, I figured, well, what the heck, I'll just call it. And so it was a broker telling me that there was a car wash for sale in the west end of town, which I seem to have remembered going through once or twice in my life, which should have been my first clue. But he told me that they were doing 50,000 cars a year, to which I said, I can't believe that. And he says, well, go down and count them. So sure enough, I did. I grabbed a counter and a bagged lunch, and I sat outside 625 West Putnam Avenue for the better part of a day. And I clicked off close to 500 cars. And I multiplied that times 360, figuring he'd be closed on Christmas and New Year's and so on, and came up with a number that was far in excess of $50,000 cars. So I call up my good friend, Chris Fisher, who he and I and a couple other buddies had a boat cleaning business when we were in school. And I called him up and I said, well, Chris, we have to buy this business. And he said, well, Mark, we don't know anything about car washing. I said, well, what do you got to know? There's a dirty car at the front, and soap and water, machine pulls it through, clean at the back end. I swear I said those exact words. Then he said, well, we're not very mechanical. And I said, well, they've got a guy down there. He can fix anything. And then he finally said, well, we don't have any money. To which I responded, well, you're right there, but I do know how to write a really good loan proposal. So we borrowed money from State National Bank and from the seller. And a month later, or 2 months later, we were in the car wash business.
Wow. That's incredible. And you had been, I remember, because I was around back then, you actually had a dive business where you cleaned boat bottoms, and all summer you were working hard and earning money, and had your own company back then. So
yeah,
it was kind of in your blood, and I think sitting behind a desk was not something that you were necessarily cut out for. So I remember that. So you start with one wash, and obviously learn the business through trial and error there, and then you start to grow it, and you're kind of talk about the bootstrapping and how you were able to cobble together 15, 20 locations without really going to the market. You sort of bootstrapped it.
Yeah, we went through a number of iterations, Peter. It really wasn't until 13 years after we bought Greenwich that we came up with the concept of washing cars by hand on conveyor. And but not only that, we would have a store, a gallery, waiting area where people could watch the entire wash process through seamless glass from front to back. And the store would be filled with greeting cards and gifts and bags and things that were attractive to look at while you were waiting for your card to be completed. And it took off so well when we opened in 1994 that I looked at Chris and said, we've got to do this again. And it wasn't until a year later that we found a kind of a dilapidated location up in Bedford Hills, New York, and took that over and then converted it to another hand wash. But the first iteration, we actually, at that point, were making enough money that we could go to the bank and we could borrow money to do the renovation and add that tunnel. When we went out to the second location, we had not only the improvement costs, but we also had to buy the business. So that was more than we could borrow at that point. So we brought in an outside investor, a friend that I had known for a number of years, David Murphy from Greenwich, and he came in and gave us seed capital for our second location, and then put some money in on the third. We borrowed some money, so he was in on the third through seventh location. And at that stage, we were doing well enough that we believed that we could take over the business and continue to fund it by ourselves. We bought David out in, I think, 2003. But we ran into the wall. There were more opportunities than we could borrow money for or that we were making, having reinvested much into the third, the seventh, the eighth, the ninth, the 10th. So we started to take on outside investors and, individual investors investing in the Costco location or the Darien location or one of the other locations we had. And it's a very slow process. One, because you had to search out the investors, then you had to educate the investors, and we're a weather-related business, so there's real challenges there. So it's a slow process, and that's really when it started to prompt me to think there has to be a better way, and private equity seemed to be the answer. In the late 2000s. Leonard Green bought Mr. Car Wash, which was, I think, maybe a 60 wash chain in the United States, mainly down in the southwest area of the states. And when Leonard Green came into the market, I really knew something was up and really felt that there was going to be a kind of a seismic shift in our industry where more private equity was going to come in. There was going to be a lot more consolidation. So as a defensive move, I figured I better get on that train sooner than later because we're going to have people coming into our marketplace because our market was completely fragmented. At that stage, when I first started looking, we might have had 15, 16 locations, and we were by far and away the biggest in the area. But I was afraid that there was going to be somebody much bigger coming in. So that was really where it stemmed from.
So that really drove you to say, there's some bigger fish in the pond, and we could get eaten. So maybe I should think about that. But at that point, as you said, you're in the Northeast, you're not in the Southwest. We have weather, and we have, it's not sunny every day. You're not in the desert. So the private equity model usually requires leverage. So I think at that point, it was like, how can we, what was the company investable at that moment? Could you have attracted private equity in that configuration?
Well, we had a deal much earlier that fell apart, not necessarily because of what we were doing, but because of the financial crisis in 2008.
Yeah.
But I think between those two times, one of the things that became paramount in our industry and certainly in our business was the subscription model. And we hadn't fully embraced it. In fact, the early stages, we were kind of giving it the Heisman and saying, it doesn't make sense. But having done a little bit more research, and we really got into the data of our customers and how often they bought from us, we realized that most of our customers were coming to us but a few times a year. And to convert somebody that's coming 6 times a year to somebody that effectively is coming 2 times a month is a fantastic jump in business. And the other thing that it does is it removes some of the seasonality of the business because they're paying a monthly subscription. Sometimes the bear eats you and sometimes you eat the bear. So in the winter months following a snowstorm and salt's all over their car, I might be seeing them 2 times a week. Whereas during the summer, when there isn't much going on, they might come once. So it all averages out. But what it does is it makes a more even business, an investable business. And that's when private equity really got excited about the car wash industry.
Yeah, I mean, I would think in the Northeast that, it would be very hard to be investable if you didn't have that recurring revenue stream. And tell us a little bit about, I mean, as a model, how sticky is that investor base? I mean, I know people move and obviously move to different areas, so that causes churn. But what is it? I mean, is it a stable base for you?
It is a stable base and a stable and growing base for us. I think there are a few dynamics behind it. One, I think people get addicted to having a clean car because once you get into it, when it's dirty, you really take notice of it. And the fact that there's no obstacle to getting your car clean, you don't have to think about whether it's worth it. In fact, it incents you to come more often to make it more worth it to you. But I think it's getting addicted to a clean car. And obviously there's asset benefits to your car being more valuable at trade-in or lower turn-in fees on a lease and all those good things. But I think it's just that feeling people get when you drive out in a clean car. Your car looks great. You spent a lot of money on it. And I think that's what really changed people and keep people in the program. Typically, we see the people that get out of the program, it's either they aren't using it enough, and that may be just because of their schedules or what have you. People move, people die. Very little from satisfaction. It's primarily a use thing, Peter. So our churn is relatively low.
Right. Okay. And then, I know that scaling is never a straight line, and 1 to 15 and then 15 on to 60 or 70 where you are now. What mistakes did you make along the way? I mean, there's got to be some bad locations, or I don't know, you tell me. What
Peter, I don't think we have 4 or 5 hours to go through this. I would tell you that the mistakes they changed over time. I think early on, one of the errors we made when we were seeing that early success, after we opened up the first hand wash and then we bought Bedford Hills and it was a rousing success, and we built Norwalk and that was a good wash. I think at that point we believed just about anything that we touched would turn to gold. And it allowed it caused us to look at locations that were not good locations. We just assumed, put splash on the door and bingo, people would show up. That is not true. The second part of that, and maybe equally as important, is that I don't think we had a systematic systems in place to be able to scale the way we needed to replicate the success of number 1 to number 2 to number 7 to number 8. So what we started to see was a copy of a copy of a copy. And while there were some traces of the culture and the systems in Site 6, it was nothing like when Mark and Chris were at Greenwich every single day running the shop and making sure that it was running the way it was supposed to be running. And so I think that's really two of the mistakes that we made, was believing that we were smarter or better than we really were, and not having systems set so that we could replicate the culture and the operational techniques that we had. And as that just in itself created problems. If we don't process the cars quick enough, because they don't know how to process cars. We didn't have a training system where
Right.
people could learn that next thing in order to run their places as well as number one did. And the further out you got from that, we found that the results mirrored their longevity with us.
Right. Right. So obviously essential if you're going to go from one to many. Playbooks are really important to be able to have a standardized, approach that works and is successful. And then, you dilute your culture too. I mean, when you have one wash, the owners are there, their culture's embedded. But as you hire for store number 10, how do you import that culture or export that culture from number 1 to number 10? And how did you get around that?
Well, I was going to say, one of the things I think you helped us with, Peter, was understanding what we needed to orchestrate that. I think sometimes as you grow from 1 to 2 and 2 to 6 and 6 to 12, you tend to fall into trying to promote from within. Very good thing to do. It's a worthy, admirable direction to take your company. But just because somebody is a good detailer doesn't necessarily make him a good GM of a location. And a good GM of a location, that might be the top end of their capacity or their desire. Going to that next level where you're overseeing 6 locations. So two things there. One is being able to assess the talent to put the right people in the right positions and have the training so that you're not just saying, okay, well, you should know how to run managers because you were one. Helpful, but not necessarily, it's a different level person that you're talking to. You're not talking to your line worker or your cashier. You're talking to a guy that's running a $2 or $3 million business that has 20 or 30 people working underneath them. He has to be treated in a different fashion in order to hit his numbers.
Right.
So I think that was a really important thing that you helped us with. And then also kind of figuring out from an executive standpoint, what do you need? Because you tend to grab as much as was out there. If nobody was doing a job, that was your job. So, I was in charge of marketing, and I was in charge of finance, and I was in charge of being CEO. The CEO job was quite, enough for me.
Yeah.
Quite sufficient. I didn't need any more. So I think those are some of the things that you have to think about. And they do cost money, but it's an investment in a future of growth. If you don't make that investment in the future of growth, there's a good chance that you could run into the stone wall before you get to that next level.
Right. You certainly ease the bottleneck because you can't do all 3 of those jobs well. Marketing, operations and CEO, it's just overwhelmed. So let's get, your concept was a hand wash, which requires labor. And obviously you had to hire quite a few laborers for the roles. And, what I've always been impressed with is that you had, in a high turnover sort of industry, you've been able to retain your employees pretty well. How have you been able to attract, hire, and most importantly, retain with that great experience curve built in to those laborers? How have you been able to retain your employees?
Well, I think that's evolved since the beginning, but one thing hasn't changed since the beginning, which is the care that you give your employees is the care your employees will give your customers.
Yeah.
And I think that, car wash has been the quintessential poster boy for the dead end job, right? And so when we started to treat people as if it wasn't a dead-end job, that it was a respectable job, we paid them well, we treated them well, we gave them benefits, we gave them things that most people, most companies, and certainly most car washes at the outset were never doing. We basically took care of them. If they needed $200 for their rent, we gave them $200 for the rent and allowed them to pay it back over whatever period of time. Um, you know, that was early on. It was just a culture of care. But I think as we started to grow, then the opportunities started to present themselves. So now all of a sudden you had people coming in at ground level. They were vacuuming cars. They were doing windows. They were hand washing the cars. But they could see a path to promotion. And I think that did two things. One, it presented that opportunity. So you saw guys trying to excel at their jobs so they'd be recognized, put into a supervisory capacity, and then start on the ladder to success. But that then brought in some people that would normally look at car wash as a dead end, now saying, no, there's an opportunity here. So the guy that may have started as a vacuumer is now running a $3 million site, and making six figures and owns his own house and has a car provided for him. That really sets a beautiful vision and picture for everybody that's coming underneath them.
Yes. It's funny because, that is one of the reasons that companies have to grow, because they enable the A players to rise and move up the ladder, create a better life for themselves. And if you don't grow, you're going to lose those people and become very mediocre. And you were able to provide that for them.
There's some guys, Peter, that will be glad to get to that top level and be very comfortable staying there.
Right.
But that's not everybody. Yeah. And if they're uncomfortable, and the only way that they get a promotion is you dying, or you retiring, and putting them in that top position, really, they're going to start to look elsewhere. And especially now that the market has gotten so competitive, your competition is going to be talking to them.
Yeah, and poaching them. So, okay, now we get to the point where you've bootstrapped, you've tapped your friends and family, you've gotten to 20 locations, 25, and you look out and you see still a fragmented industry, and you say, I want to, you raise your hand and say, I want to go ahead and make the move. I want to become a consolidator. I want to become the big fish. Talk about the journey to private equity, and then what it was like going from being the co-founder owner with Chris, and then to becoming a private equity CEO.
Well, it was an interesting process, and I won't bore you with the longer story, which was trying to consolidate with another group that you advised us on. But when it got down to the singular search, where we're talking to groups just as investors in us, a little bit of it's the private equity groups trying to sell us. So, you're being told how wonderful you are and how great you are. And you get the letter of intent, and that's wonderful. And then the tough stuff starts, and they have to weed through all that you've created to know what they're buying, and getting you into a position where you're ready, quite frankly, for them to sell you. So, I know one of the questions you'd asked is how do you prepare yourself? Well, I think the more that you have things systematized and set down so that your accounting practices are clear, if you have audited statements, that much better. But having systems that they can see and touch and feel confident in with regards to how you operate your business, how you run your people, how you run your finances, what are the checks and balances, having all those things neat and tight are going to make you far more attractive to more groups. Whereas if you're really fragmented and a complete mess, some of the groups, most groups will just pass. And the other groups that know that they have to dig in and do all this hard work to get you to the point where they can sell you to another PE firm or strategic firm, they want it so buttoned up. If they have to do all that work, they're going to pay you less. So they're either going to pass or pay you less. So the more you can get your company organized. So we were organized financially, we were organized operationally. I think the thing that was the biggest challenge was that we had this fragmented ownership where I had an investor in Costco, I had an investor in Bedford, had a different group in this location. And that made the challenge that much harder for us. So it took us a little extra time getting into it. Once we got into it, I think we picked the right partner. They were helpful in helping us understand the dynamics of where we wanted to go. But they were smart enough to let us run our business, as opposed to come in and telling us how we should run our business, or that we needed to cut half our payroll, or things along that lines. They were really good about that. And I think that, to their credit, really helped us be able to grow. They handled the finances, so I didn't have to go, hat in hand to the bank or to an investor. They had it, that all handled. So it was really, okay, I want to make this acquisition. Can we do it? And they would put it together with our financial institution and with our LPs to decide whether we could and make these purchases that we made. So that was extremely helpful.
Yeah, and the beauty of that transaction, I thought, was, here we are, we're 2018. You've been in there, almost for 40 years at that point, and taking salary and distributions, but took a little bit of money off the table, but got the capital you needed to really say, okay, I'm going to turn this into, from a almost local, bordering on regional wash and size, to a really a super regional, where you could say this, we, the Northeast, New England, even into New York and other areas, we were, we're the leader, and that puts you in a whole different category of company for future sale and things like that. And obviously the earnings grew commensurately as well, but you were able to turn yourself into a regional powerhouse, which is where you are today.
It was an interesting transition, Peter, to go from CEO of your own company, and I had to talk to one guy, and just kind of get his blessing, on any decision, to a process, and understanding that I wasn't ultimately the sole decider. I was an influencer. I had a vote, but it was not a majority vote. And so that was took a little getting used to. But as I say, I think they were fairly laissez-faire and allowed us to go. And if we had a good reason for going in a direction, making an acquisition, we'd listen to their questions. If we could answer their questions, then generally they were in agreement with us.
Right. Okay. So to frame the situation, it's 2024, and you went into the transaction, the first one in 2019, and you were 25 stores. You were up to 65 or 70, I think. Am I right with the numbers?
Yeah.
And 5 years down the line. And tell us again, you took the company and you sold it again to your most recent investor. And what is the plan now? I mean, you're up to 70. What's the new plan with the new investor?
Well, I think the new investor is conservative, and ambitious at the same time. The game plan is to kind of continue the growth pattern that we have over the last couple of years and add 15 to 20 locations a year. for the next 3 years. That said, there have been a lot of opportunities in our industry that have come to the table that are far larger than that we're looking at. And part of going through that analysis is, okay, why would we do something that large? And there may be some benefits and pros and cons, and it really relates probably to the price that we pay, the value that we can derive out of that acquisition. But in the meantime, barring anything major and unexpected coming along, we'll continue to look out for opportunities in our area, maybe broadening our area out and grabbing either singles, doubles, or even small, regional chains, the 5 to 15 locations.
Right. And so the opportunity is still there, and it's still fragmented, and there's still room to grow. And one of the things that in retail, of course, when you think about retail, and I'd say you're in an edge of it, you think about Amazon, and this is really one of those retailers that's non-Amazon, and it's the one way people can play the consumer trade, is by doing a car wash, which is non-Amazon sort of competitive. So that's an interesting thing. So okay, so more to come in terms of the growth, and then your role has morphed too, because you're now CEO. You moved to chairman with this last transaction, and I know you were really directing the acquisition program in the last, well, really forever, and you kind of retained that. How is that moving from being the guy to, okay, I kept my strategic acquisition side, but I'm now the chairman?
Well, it's very interesting. Having your fingers in virtually everything every day. We're 7-day a week business, 360 days a year. You're involved with it. And to shift out and allow the new CEO, who is my chief operating officer, and has been for 25 years. So, we're joined at the hip. We talk more than I talk to my wife or my kids. It's 7-day a week situation. To shift out of that, where I'm allowing him to take over the role he's now assuming, and keep my nose and my fingers, out of it, is a difficult transition. I have to admit. And there are times where I hear about a meeting and a result of a meeting or a decision that's been made, and I've not been a part of it. And so part of it, it's like, oh, well, this is my baby for 44 years, and now I don't even get to say what it's going to wear. But that's okay. That's okay. It'll take a little while to get used to, but I'm working on it,
Right.
weaning myself off. But the M&A side of it is as active. No, it's been more active than it ever has been. There's just a lot of things going on in our industry. Some of the groups that got to 5, got to 10, got to 15 locations, now looking to exit. Some of the big groups looking to exit. Some smaller operators who might have missed the boat a couple, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, now look at it and go, well, I'm 65, I'm 70, I'm 75, my kid's not going to take it over. I need to think about exiting. So there's just a lot of potential out there, and it's all over the map. There's some great opportunities, and then there's some really overpriced opportunities, obviously that we'll avoid, but it'll be interesting to see if somebody comes in and picks up those opportunities.
Yeah. And so just before we leave the sort of succession and Dan coming up to become the CEO, what was the process that you went through? Obviously, you had areas of expertise that you loved, gave you energy, and you were really, you were in charge of it, and Dan was not. How did you get him comfortable, or did you delegate to other people as well, or how was that how was that handled in terms of handing off some of those responsibilities? Because often I see transitions times, and it's really hard for that, either the person coming up doesn't have the same skills, or it's really hard for the owner to let go and really train that person to become really good at those jobs that he was doing beforehand.
Yeah, it's a great comment. And I'd say yes to all of that. Um, I think Dan's skill sets in terms of operations are second to none, much better than mine, as a matter of fact. But I think some of the other areas is where he's grown over the last few years, with the full anticipation that at some point I was going to hang up my cleats
Right.
based on a full-time basis. So that's allowed him to kind of step into that role. And as we look to make this deal with AEA, the latest private equity group to get involved with us, we really anticipated him taking that role. So he really was in the role and has been for several months. Obviously, I've been there, obviously backstopping him, advising him, as I still am. But part of it is you got to watch what you wish for. If you want to stay CEO, nobody else is going to be CEO. You're going to stay there. You're not going to put the guy in a position of success. So you've got to allow them to get in there, make their decisions, be executives, help them when they are going down the wrong path, help them when they need advice, and make them feel comfortable about asking for advice and absolutely never saying I told you so, or I wouldn't have done that when they make a mistake. But I think it's really removing myself out of that position and really starting to find my new role that's really critical to keep the company successful.
Yeah. I mean, the growth, and for that investor to make a return, generating that growth is essential. So you still have a very, very key role. Well, great, Mark. If someone wants to learn more about Splash Car Washes or yourself, what is the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Well, they can definitely contact me on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest. They can certainly email me as well. And, our website, splashcarwashes.com, they can go to get information on the company and see what we're up to.
Yeah. Well, I love the story. It's really soup to nuts. It's from birthing it all the way towards, creating a very big scale business, and then selling it and growing it and having it become investable along the way. And you've seen it all. And so I appreciate your taking the time to be with me today. And
Well, thank you.
And thank you for the audience for listening in, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peter.